So Brian Reynolds here with it looks like we're coming up now. And Ben, you're gonna handle the clicking back and forth because it's showing Dustin right now.
Yes.
So I assume you're going to.
Yes.
I mean, the broadcast has Dustin on. What I'm seeing in a second.
You
second
have to
monitor.
click, Brian.
No, no, that would be you, I believe. I am a little blurry. I see that. So we're going to get started here in a few moments. It's a little before 10 o'clock, and we're excited to have Dustin Harris, the appraiser coach, on. Until some more folks join in, we're going to wait until at least near 10 o'clock to really dive into this hot topic, if you will. How's the coach doing?
Hey, Brian, how you doing this morning, man?
I'm great. I'm great. What's going on in your world, brother?
Busy day. You know, people, appraisers are talking about the big slowdown that's coming. I have to tell you, it hasn't hit me yet.
So you're pretty busy, huh?
7 inspections today. I'll probably put 350 miles on my car today.
Nice. I hope you have a pretty little gas efficient vehicle that you're driving around.
You know, I picked up a Subaru this year, a Subaru Legacy, and so it's got the all-wheel drive, which I need in this mountainous area. But it gets about 30, 33 on the highway, and comfortable little car.
Great. Yeah, I'm just chomping. You know, I want a big old truck or a big old Jeep Wrangler or something, and I know better. I know better, but that's what I want.
Yeah, I hear you.
Hey, Ben and Sam, you probably already hear it. I'm still getting a little stuff. I don't know if there's anything you can do at this point or not, but I thought I'd just mention that to you.
Okay, hang on. We'll work on that now.
All right. And so we've got a couple dozen folks on watching us talk about cars right now, which is fine. As we get a little closer to start time, we'll kind of dive into this. So you said you've got several inspections. Are most of those mortgage transactions or other stuff?
You know, I haven't even looked at it. The nice thing about the way I set up my business, Brian, is I, see no evil, hear no evil. I really don't even know what I'm doing until I do. I know I'm going to Wyoming today, and I know I've got 7 inspections, but other than that, I just hit them as I hit them.
Yeah, there you go. You just have somebody else say, Dustin, this is where you need to be, when you need to be there, and you say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, and you go.
Yeah, you know, the great thing is I've got a great staff that supports me. They set up my appointments. They do the research prior to me going out. They schedule me, and I wake up in the morning and take my marching orders. So it's the way I love to do it. I don't want to worry about anything till I have to. So.
Yeah, that's excellent. You know, that's similar to a model we've got. We've opened an office up in Nashville, and we even have our support people map out the route that the appraiser should drive for efficiency purposes. You know, one thing I've learned as I get older, you know, and I continue to learn because I'm just not that bright, but one thing you can't get back is time. And so time is very precious to me. And what we try to do is maximize our appraiser's time as well to make it as efficient as possible. So we probably kind of are very similar with some of the things we do in that regard.
You know, a lot of appraisers don't think you can do 7 inspections in one day, especially if you're driving to Wyoming. But not only am I going to do 7 inspections today, but I will get all the comp pictures, and I will be home by 6 p.m.
Awesome. Yeah, they've routed out your driving route as well, right? That's great.
Down dinner today, though.
Yeah,
dinner,
I'm with you there.
Lunch will be a drive-through. A salad, of course. That's why. That's how I keep.
Well, and that's hard to eat that salad while you're driving.
I've perfected it, my friend. I can eat a salad, stick my camera out the window, take a comp picture, take a phone call. Don't tell anybody.
Yeah. I know for years, I resisted doing drive-bys, and thank goodness I opened up my mind and started doing those and explore and embrace new technology, new ideas, different ways of looking at things. But yeah, I used to get calls and say, "Do you do drive-bys?" And I said, "Sure, sure." And the next question, of course, is, "Well, what do you charge for that?" And typically my answer is, "Well, it depends on how fast I drive by the property." Oh,
You know, I know you're teasing, but you know what's funny is the way cameras are these days. It used to be you had to pretty much come to a complete stop on those things.
right.
Smartphones.
Right.
I mean, I've got an iPhone 8 Plus. I can fly by at I don't know 30 miles an hour, and it takes a pretty good picture.
I love it. I love it. I love it. All right. So we've got more and more people chiming in now, and I still want to hold back the reins just a little bit before we get on the subject matter. But for those folks that are kind of peeking in right now, a couple of minutes early, tell everybody where you're gonna. I know you're looking at houses today, but if somebody would like to actually see you live and in person and shake your hand and kind of chat with you, where are you going to be next, Dustin? Where's your travel plans taking you?
Well, you know, I'm going to answer that in two different ways. I've got, if you want to actually shake my hand and get my terms, I will be in Las Vegas here next week for the Expo, Valuation Expo, as well as my mastermind groups will be meeting on Monday and Thursday of next week. And then, of course, in November, we've got the summit. I will be there in Vegas again for the summit. But you know, one of the things we've been doing, Brighton, is monthly we've been meeting online for an interactive meeting very similar to this, where we're chatting back and forth and helping appraisers improve their business model and become more efficient and become more successful. So, you know, on a monthly basis, I'm meeting with appraisers across the nation. It may not be in person, but it's the next best thing.
Great. So tell everybody what that is exactly. You mentioned mastermind group, and I assume that's what you're talking about with that monthly meeting. So you have a regular interaction, and then you, once a year, or maybe a couple of times a year, have a live session. Tell everybody about that.
They're actually two different groups. So I've got what I call the Dream Team Mastermind. We meet quarterly in 6 cities across the nation, DC, Chicago, Salt Lake, Dallas, and 2 groups in Las Vegas. And we meet every 3 months. That's a small group of people, just a handful that sit around a table, 6 to 8. We spend the day hashing out ideas and improving each other's business. I mean, we're at that meeting, we're not just appraisers, we're business owners, and we're helping other owners to improve and become more efficient and take them from one level to another. But the online meeting is called the Appraiser Academy. It's a different group. But we meet on a monthly basis. We also chat in between months on a private board as well to help each other virtually, if you will, to kind of do something similar to what the mastermind does in person.
Fantastic. You know, we used to have a group that we'd get together, about 4 or 5 of us, and it was just a group of FHA fee panel appraisers. That tells you how far back I'm going. And Shirley stopped doing it, and several years later, a local appraiser, Carol Hayden, said, "You remember that old breakfast club we had? Why don't we get back together?" And it was really great. We met once a month on a Saturday, and we had breakfast, and we just shared ideas and things going on. So at Carol's recommendation, I reached out to every appraiser in the area and invited them. We ended up having 33 appraisers show up, which was fantastic for my little town. And we did that for about a year. And then I said, you know, can somebody else, can I pass the torch off to someone else and let them? Of course, it kind of died down after that. But, you know, there are appraisers that are just fantastic appraisers that maybe are not fantastic business owners or business people. So I'm very interested in what you're talking about, these groups you have getting together, and I'm sure some of our viewers are very interested. Dustin, if somebody wanted to get more information about that, or if they wanted to actually be part of these groups that you get together on a regular basis, what do they do? How do they do about getting that information?
You know, the best thing to do, Brian, is just to go to my website, theappraisercoach.com, www.theappraisercoach.com. Just click on the memberships tab and you'll see the different options there. You know, you talk about getting together in your local market. One of the things that we do in our mastermind group, Brian, is we make sure that there's a non-compete clause, meaning For example, we can't have two Salt Lake City appraisers in the same group. And we do that so that they feel free to open up about their numbers, their business tactics, their marketing schemes, that kind of a thing, and not feel like they're feeding the enemy, if you will.
Gotcha. Sure. Great idea. Great concept. Glad that's going well for you. So we've got more and more folks coming in. We're just a couple of minutes before start time. And I know you're on a limited time today, and 7 inspections and getting in here pretty soon. So we appreciate you being on today, Dustin. So I think we'll go ahead and get started here. Give me 1 second, and I will make sure we have everything in order, and we'll get going. All right. It's a couple of minutes before. I'm sure we've got several folks continuing to come in, but we're going to go ahead and get started because this is a hot topic. It's getting a lot of feedback. It's getting a lot of concerns of appraisers out there. And so let's just dive right into it. My guest is Dustin Harris, the appraiser coach. Welcome to the Appraisal Report, and we're going to be talking about some crazy stuff going on right now. Welcome, Dustin.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brian. It's good to be here.
So let's just dive right in. Stand by to throw some things up. But the first thing, I had an appraisal instructor in my office a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago. I lose track of time. I said, "So what do you think about day one certainty?" And she said, "What?" I said, "Okay, maybe day one uncertainty." So let's talk about that for a minute, because believe it or not, I think there's a lot of appraisers out there really aware or haven't heard a lot of what we're going to talk about today. So, Dustin, what do you know about this day one certainty thing? What is it, and what's going on?
Well, Brian, it's good to be here. I'm seeing some of the same concern across the nation. As you know, I interact with appraisers from sea to shining sea on a regular basis, and I'm seeing a lot of individuals working a little bit from the scarcity and fear mindset, unfortunately, and hopefully we can help with that today. But I think it's good, Brian, to start out with some definitions. Let's talk about day one certainty. That is the way I understand it, a Fannie Mae program that utilizes the desktop underwriter. The DU, you might see the abbreviation online. DU stands for desktop underwriter. And basically what they're looking to do is on some appraisals, some loans, to avoid the appraisal altogether. They call that a PIW, or a property inspection waiver. And, it's causing some concern for appraisers for obvious reasons. If you look at it from a pie perspective, that's a little piece of that pie that Fannie Mae is saying, you know what, we don't want to feed that to appraisers anymore.
Yeah. And so a lot of appraisers have come to me and said, back when UAD came out, the concern was, hey, they're grabbing our data. And Fannie Mae said, we're not going to let appraisers use collateral underwriter. This is an analytical tool for mechanism, not for analytics, not for a database for appraisers or anything else. So they kind of kept us out of our own data, if you will, which was a little frustrating. And now the question is, well, are they using that data for these PIWs? And Ben, if you want to put up the little fact sheet that we have on the screen from Fannie Mae, and guys, when this comes up, it's just a little fact sheet of the property inspection waiver. Ben's going to share the screen so it comes up. And what we're looking at with that, and Dustin, can you see that? I don't know if he's got it on there or not.
I can see it, and I don't know if the listeners have to click. I had to actually click on it on the bottom, but yeah, I can see it.
Okay. So guys, if you can't see it big on your screen, just click on that, and hopefully it'll enlarge and you could see that. And just slightly, you can see the protocol for this. And it says property inspection waiver is an offer to waive the appraisal. That's kind of scary, depending on what we're looking at. And you can kind of see the steps 1 through 4, right? they issued an offer to waive the appraisal. Now scroll down just a little bit more, Ben, and it talks about how it works. And you know, while this is scary, I think we would all agree that there are probably certain instances where maybe it's understandable. For instance, Dustin, what is a subdivision? Give me a name of a subdivision that if you found out that one of the appraisals today you're looking at, the inspections you're doing today, I mean, you would be thrilled to death because it's just an easy subdivision. There's lots of comps, that kind of, you could do it in your sleep virtually.
Sure.
What's a subdivision? Give me a name.
I could give you 3 or 4. We've got a builder here locally that basically has 5 model homes, and they just bam.
All right. What's the name of that subdivision, if you don't mind?
Red Rock subdivision would be an easy peasy cookie cutter. They sometimes.
Okay. Red Rock. So for our viewers, let's just stay here, and I'm not going to ask you to talk about value. We don't want to talk about value right now, but sales price. Sale price is a fact, right? That's not an opinion. A sale price is a fact. So over the last year or 18 months, what have the sales been in that neighborhood?
Okay. Yeah. So on the low end, you're looking, and keep in mind, folks, we're talking Idaho here. So I got to be careful here because I start throwing these numbers out and everybody's thinking, are you kidding me? I'm moving to Idaho. 140 on the low end is a little starter home. About 1040, no basement, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. And then on the high,
let's just stick with those. Let's just stick with those. Yeah. So 140,000 a sale price, not an opinion of value. I don't want anybody chiming in saying Brian and Dustin are doing appraisals on a webinar right now. We're talking about sale prices.
I'm putting my certifications on a piece of paper right now so I can say them.
So 140,000 was a sale price on a bad day. What do you think might be? You know, my point is, if somebody's coming into a bank and they say, "Hey, I've got a house that's paid for. I want to borrow $25,000. I don't know what my house is worth. I paid $140 for it 5 years ago, and you know it's an average shape." You know, that's probably a relatively low risk loan. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. And obviously, there's more than just the value that needs to be considered. You've got the credit,
sure,
market itself. You bet.
And I think that we went from we went historically back in the savings and loan, crisis. We were more collateral based. Then we went to more credit based. And then the most recent housing crisis, I don't know where we're at, but here we go again. Look where it says the majority of the transactions will not receive a PIW offer. So that might be a little relief for us right now. But I want to say when this first came out, it was just for refinances. And Ben, if you scroll down just a little bit more, I believe there's a little matrix there, and it talks about the eligible properties. And Dustin, when this first came out, I thought, well, this has to just be refinances on primary residences. And as you can see, it's talking about second homes, investment properties. It's kind of unbelievable. And now the most recent news, and Ben, if you take that away and put up the letter from 2 days ago, I want to get your take on this one, Dustin. If you, not that one, Ben, there we go. Scroll down a little bit to where it says PIW. And guys, note the date on this is 2 days ago, September 26th. And you'll note on this one, it says, since then, the market shifted from a refinance to a purchase market. In response, we now also offer PIWs on certain purchase transactions. Now, you can take that away, Ben, and go back to Dustin if you like. Dustin, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, if you're an appraiser out there and you do primarily mortgage work, whether it be refinances and first mortgages for purchases, and we're gonna give some survey results in a little bit. We asked some of our viewers. I mean, what would be going through your head right now if you know at first it was refinances. So hey, I'm safe because I do a lot of purchases. And now it's not only refis, it's purchases, but they're saying it's just on a small number. But they also said it was only refis and now it's purchases. I mean, what's going through your head? What's going through the head of a typical appraiser right now?
Repeat after me. Slippery slope.
Slippery slope.
First of all, Brian, it must be nice to be a GSE, somebody that's big enough that can say, okay, the entire nation has now moved from a refi market to a purchase market. We're going to unilaterally make that decision, and consequently, we're going to move these PIWs into the purchase realm. No, honestly, Brian, this was not a surprise to me. The only thing that was a surprise to me that it came a little bit sooner than I thought it would. As you know, we talked about the day one certainty. That's the Fannie Mae program. Freddie has its own program. It's called ACE, believe it or not. Stands for automatic collateral valuation or evaluation, I think is the acronym ACE, which I find interesting. But anyway, ACE has been using PIWs for purchase transactions, I think, from the very beginning. And so I think it was just a matter of time before Fannie adopted that as well. Brian, about a year ago, I sat in, and it may have been 2 years ago now, but I sat in a room with Zach Dawson from Fannie Mae, and he was talking about PIWs, and the number that he threw out was less than 10%. That's what he said. Less than 10% of the overall transactions would qualify for these PIWs. Now, the problem is that's fine and that's good, but has that changed now with the purchase transactions? I can't imagine that it wouldn't have. And and that's why I say slippery slope. Who knows? What will it be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Will we move from 10% to 80%? Who knows? I mean, it's an unknown. It's a crystal ball thing. But you know what, Brian? I'm an optimistic guy, but appraisers need to be concerned. I mean, if they're primarily looking at their business model in such a way where most of their eggs or even all of their eggs are in the lending side of things, and especially when it comes to the Fannie and Freddie forms, it may be time to start looking at some different things.
Right. And we're going to talk about that a little later in our segment here. Maybe some recommendations you may have, Dustin. I know you do a variety of things as well as I. And we'll touch on that in just a little bit. It's interesting to see how things change so quickly. And one thing is certain is change. I mean, things are going to change, and you better be prepared for that. Appraisers resist change, and
Sure.
and I get it. I've been in those shoes before as well, and I'm a little bit more open to that as well as you. We're going to talk about some letters that this has gotten the attention of a lot of folks. So we're going to talk about some letters that have been issued and some concerns that have been raised, because I think you're right, Dustin. I don't think it's necessarily to what extent they're doing it right now. It's where are we going to be in short order? If
Right.
these things start working pretty efficiently for them, why wouldn't they expand it? And, the banks are going to be interested in it because, guys, one thing for sure, I mean, we live in a world, a society today of instant gratification. I mean, there's an app for everything, right? So our consumers and banks and users of appraisal services are going to continue to wait 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks for an appraisal. They're not. And so something's got to give for that. I know the agencies want them in 2 days, and I know when I rush to get something out the door real quickly, I'm more prone to error. And I think that's probably true for most of us. But let's talk about some of these letters that went out real quick. And Ben, if you could put a couple of these up. The first letter I want to talk to you about was, I think, 34 different, 30 or 34 different industry folks got involved and signed this. You've got the National Association of Appraisers, the American Society of Appraisers, the American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisals, Appraisal Institute. I mean, the list goes on. NAIFI, a lot of the state organizations, Utah, Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, Louisiana, Illinois, they all signed this. And you can see the letter there on the screen now, guys. And I'm not going to read this all to you. Obviously, I encourage you to get a copy. This went to the chairman on Committee on Banking and Housing and Urban Affairs. And if you look at the first paragraph, then if you can scroll back up there, it's a great letter. And it basically is a letter where a lot of appraisal organizations and entities and industry participants have come together to share this voice. And it says, we ask you to call on the Federal Housing Finance Agency to prevent the enterprises from implementing the appraisal waiver programs until they can demonstrate the appraiser waiver program. Number one, consistent with safe and sound operation of the enterprises. Number two, does not bring harm to the consumer, especially the affordable housing sector. Number three, monitored and tested with independent appraisals. And number four, integrates proper safeguards to prevent fraud. It's pretty cool, Dustin. What do you think? I mean, you know, we all have our differences, but it seems like we kind of all got together for one voice to ask for reconsideration. Actually, they've asked for a prevention, if you will.
Yeah. No, I love this. One of the biggest complaints that I hear from appraisers across the nation is that we can't ever get united on anything, that we're single voices in the wilderness, or we're single groups here and single groups there. And even AI, which is probably maybe still the biggest group of appraisers, at least that's what they continue to claim, got on board with this. 36 other groups, or 36 maybe total groups, got on board to send out this letter. But the question, Brian, is what can a single appraiser do? And this is an opportunity for me to kind of promote. You talked about instant gratification. I'll tell you, it doesn't take very long to pick up your smartphone and call your representative and let your voice be heard. Brian, when that letter was up there, you might have noticed the last name of the chairman is Crapo. Mr. Crapo is from Idaho. In fact, his office is just down the road from me. And nice. I stopped in about 2 weeks ago and knocked on the door. And of course, Mr. Crapo wasn't in, but I let my voice be heard because I happened to be in the neighborhood. I was able to walk in person and stop at the front desk and give him my name and where I live and let him know that I'm a constituent. And this is a concern of mine. And, you may not be in Idaho Falls and be able to walk into Mr. Crapo's office, but I certainly hope that you'll pick up the phone and maybe not call Mr. Crapo, but call your own representative. Who is it that represents you in Washington, D.C.? Pick up the phone, call them. And by the way, it's more than one person. Every state has 2 senators. And depending on how big your state is, you've got some representatives, and you need to find out which one is specific to your jurisdiction. Call them up, let your voice be heard, and who knows what can and should happen, but at least you can sit back and say, I did my part as far as that goes.
Absolutely. The definition of an appraiser is one that is acting in an independent manner. And part of the problem with appraisers is we act independently. We're very opinionated, but there are times that we need to come together. And this is probably one of those times, as you're mentioning. Larry Disney has said for years, motorcycle clubs are more organized than appraisers.
Absolutely.
And I believe that. If you look at all the motorcycle rallies across the country, it's pretty evident. All right, we're going to look at another letter real quick. And by the way, if anyone has a question, anyone viewing has a question, feel free to send in a question. We will try and answer all of those if time permits, but we will answer as many as possible. We've already got a couple of questions coming in, Dustin, and we'll get to those in just a second. But I want to read another letter, and this is from the National Association of Realtors. And so, Ben, if you could put that one up on the screen, that would be great for everybody to see. It looks like he has. Again, our viewers, I don't know if you have to click on that or not, but let's take a look at that and scroll down just a little bit. You can see at the very beginning of this letter, it talks about 1.2 million members. That's pretty significant. If you look at the very last sentence of the first paragraph, it says NAR is supportive of innovation in the housing industry as it relates to improving the home financing transactions for buyers and sellers, but urges caution when dealing with safety and soundness elements such as an appraisal. You look down to the third paragraph, the very last sentence says, NAR's own code of ethics and responsible valuation policy stress the care which must be taken in determining value of a home, especially considering a purchase, as that's the largest investments that most folks will make in their lifetime. So we're talking about something very significant here, folks. If you're having brain surgery, you don't probably want the quickest and cheapest. If you're settling a multi-million-dollar estate, you probably don't want the quickest and cheapest. And you got to think, for most buyers, probably the single most significant investment they'll make in their lifetime. It goes on to say that they have had some concerns about appraisal wait times and fees in certain markets. And basically it concludes on page 2 that says, NAR has many questions. So they've got a lot of questions with regard to this property inspection waiver and the thought of having closed without an appraisal altogether. So NAR's chimed in. Dustin, what do you think about that?
You know, I like this letter, Brian. I don't love this letter. I like the fact that they're urging caution. I don't love the fact that they have not come out in stronger language. Appraisers need to remember that most of them, depending on their situation, but I would say most of them are members of NAR. We forget that. We think of those individuals out there as being quote unquote realtors, but you've seen the commercials. I've seen the commercials that says, realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors. Check it out. My guess is that your board dues went directly to counting as one of those 1.2 million on there, and thus, again, you've got a voice, and you need to express that voice. Just yesterday, I think it was, Brian, maybe 2 days ago, William Brown, the president of NAR, was interviewed. I think it was the Appraisal Buzz that interviewed him and posted that. I would encourage folks to read that interview. I think you'll probably come away with the same feeling that I have. You know, they're definitely urging caution. They're definitely, especially when talking to appraisers, they seem to be on our side. I wish they would get a little bit more of a background and speak up a little bit more strongly, because here's the bottom line, Brian. I mean, obviously the GSEs can do whatever they want, but man, if they didn't learn from 2008, I don't know. I don't know what to, I don't know what other lesson, they were taken to the woodshed then, and maybe they're still trying to let that sink in. But I think that's the biggest concern. Obviously, we appraisers have a built-in bias. We want to feed our families, and we want to make our car payments. And we want work, and anything that takes away from that, whether Zach Dawson says it's only going to be 10% or reality sinks in and maybe it's more than that. But our built-in bias obviously is our concern for our livelihood going forward. But that being said, sure, I'm also, as a citizen of the United States, concerned about the housing market and making sure that we are safe. These are big investments, and people, if you haven't seen that little movie that Hollywood put out recently,
let me guess, The Big Short, is that what you're referring to?
I mean, that'll just blow your mind. It really will. And it's just interesting to see how it looks like we're prone to repeat the same mistakes more than once. I hope that's not the case, but I don't think property inspection waivers help the case. I certainly don't.
Right. If you haven't seen The Big Short, check it out. Being in the industry, you will appreciate that movie. It was very interesting. It was eye-opening. A lot of the things, I'm sure Dustin, as we were aware of happening. And if you think about some of it now, and really during the time, you kind of laugh. Stated income was one of the ones that always killed me. We're not going to verify it. Just tell me how much money you make and we'll make the loan. And we're not going to check. You don't have to worry. We're not going to check, and I know that wasn't the intent of it, but was it misused? Of course. 125% loan to value. We know your house is worth $100,000. It's worth $100,000, but you have sterling credit. So we're going to give you 125. What a great idea, and then somebody hits a bump in the road and they have a hard time. Are they going to are they going to go get 3 jobs and suffer through that? Or they're upside down in the house. They're likely going to walk, And back when our parents and grandparents bought houses, they had to have big down payments. I mean, there was more skin in the game. If it took you 10 years to save money to buy that house, you're probably less likely to walk in the event you hit a little bump in the road. Hey, Dustin, real quick, I want to talk about a little blog that you wrote. I believe it's entitled, "Is it the End of the Appraiser?" And what I'd like for you to do, if you don't mind, is let folks know, first of all, where they can read this on their own. It's a great read, by the way, and I'm not just stroking you because you're in front of me. But could you tell everybody, number one, where they can find this if they like to read it on their own? And then number two, kind of give us just a quick cliff notes of it.
Sure. Brian, the reason I wrote that article was basically in response to the concern that I was hearing across the nation from appraisers. And just want to stress that the article entitled "Is it the End of the Appraiser?" does have a huge question mark at the end of that. I am not making a statement. The title is asking the question. They can find it on my website. Again, that's theappraisercoach.com, THE, theappraisercoach.com. Just click on blog. It's, I think, the third one down. I've probably published 2 since then. It was back in August of 2017 that this one was published. It's a short read. And, spoiler alert, I'm going to answer the question for you. The answer is no, it's not the end of the appraiser, Brian.
One thing that I've talked about is, are things going to change? Are appraisers going away entirely? I don't think so. I mean, we try to do something that is, I always say we try to measure something that is simply immeasurable. Is how we try to analyze and measure human behavior. And I think that's going to be difficult for a computer to ever do. Could we get more efficient with data and analytical tools? Absolutely. Hey, let me ask you a question. We had someone write in a question. Tim asked this question. Why does Fannie Mae equate a property inspection with an appraisal? It seems to me a little misleading. They are totally different functions, yet Fannie Mae equates them.
Yeah, Brian, I have to say something. What's interesting is I frequent the online, mostly Facebook groups of appraisers. There's a couple of them out there, and I've got my own private one as well. And it's interesting because anytime PIW comes up, there's kind of some blank stares like, why the hell do we care about property inspections? That has nothing to do with us. And so Tim asked a great question, and that's really what they're looking at. When you talk about property inspection waiver, what you're really saying, it should say AW, not PIW. Because Tim's exactly right. They have equated the property inspection, if you will, in their language, both in the ACE for Freddie and the day one certainty for Fannie Mae. They use those terms interchangeably. Tim, I have no idea, man. I have no idea why they've done that, because it certainly is not a property inspection that we're talking about. When I first heard about PIWs, I thought that they were talking about moving from on-site inspections from an appraiser to, say, a desktop valuation or an eval or something of that nature. But no, they're talking about no valuation at all, really.
That's exactly right. They're not talking about just the inspection part of what we do. And a lot of appraisers even hate that term inspection, so I don't care what you call it, the observation or look around or look over or fly over or whatever you want to call it. It's the method in which we try to find out the characteristics of the subject property. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Great.
If you don't mind, I'm just gonna point out something. What's interesting here is, there's a lot of talk about what's going on with PIWs. There's a lot of talk about the changes that have occurred, and hey, I get it, but you do need to understand that this is not new. PIWs have been around since 1994. They've been around a long, long time now. Have they ramped up? Absolutely. Is there need to be concerned? Sure, absolutely. But these have been around and been used for a long time, mostly in the commercial realm, but they've been available for residences as well.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And guys, as we spoke of earlier, it's all a matter of risk, isn't it? The more risky a loan, the more they're going to look a little closer at all aspects, if you will. And I think we would all agree there are times in which, I hate the term full appraisal. I don't know where these terms come from, Dustin. I mean, I always say, well, someone calls and says, I want a full appraisal. I say, I don't know what you mean. We're running a special on half appraisals today, though. So some of these terms just irritate me a little bit, but interior, if you will. I think we would all agree that an interior observation or inspection, along with the appraiser analytics and the whole traditional process, if you will, is less risky than a drive-by. And I would say that a drive-by is probably a little less riskier for the client than a desktop, if you will. But there are times in which maybe that Red Rock subdivision example we gave earlier, you know, they really don't need an interior. The risk is so low on that loan, but they just want something for that file jacket. So maybe a desktop is appropriate. And I know appraisers have resisted that as well. Next month, we're tickled. We're going to be speaking specifically on desktop appraisals and whether or not that's something that folks should consider or not. I see it kind of the way of the future. I don't know your opinion on that, Dustin.
You know, I will just chime in and say a couple things. I think you're right as far as the risk goes on the client side. I think some of the mistakes that we as appraisers make, sometimes we equate that risk on our side as well, when, you know, the extraordinary assumption is a beautiful thing as far as our protection and liabilities go. You know, I've been saying for months now, Brian, that I believe the 1004 is going away. That form that we're all used to filling out, folks, if you've only been trained on how to hit boxes and fill in the lines on a 1004, it might be time to learn a few more tricks, because Brian, I don't consider myself an appraiser so much as a valuation professional, and that can mean a lot of different things, which I know we're going to get into here in a few minutes. But I just want to emphasize that there's more than one way to value property, and you know, as long as it's a sound business decision, and I think that that's a key. That it's a sound business decision, that there's all kinds of products that we can look at as appraisers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, before we get into our next little topic here, I would like to give some results of a survey that we asked a couple of hundred folks, a couple of hundred appraisers. So Ben, could you put that up on the screen? Hopefully he can get that up there. And so the question that we asked was, what percentage, the appraisers out there that answered this, what percentage do refinance work and purchase transactions? And boy, you could see the results we got there, Dustin. 89, more than 75%. I do. That's what my shop focuses on. So you know, and you can see the numbers come down pretty substantially from that number. So the majority of the folks that we polled or that participated in our survey, that's their business model. I mean, they do mortgage work. And I was that guy. I was that appraiser. Thank you, Ben. You know, for many, many years, if I got a call from a homeowner and they say, hey, Brian, we're thinking about selling our house. Would you come out and take a look at it and give us your professional, independent, expert opinion? I'd say, no, I can't. I'm sorry. I'd love to help you out, but I got to keep my bankers happy. You know, I got to keep those bankers happy, right? And that's all I did. I made that mistake, and we went from having 10 appraisers in my area with 4 of us doing most of the work to you blinking your eyes, and we had 33 appraisers, not counting the guys that came in from out of town. And I'm no saint. I mean, you can ask my ex-wife, but when it came to my appraisal practice, I just wouldn't cross that ethical line. So as a result, I lost some work, in particular the FHA. When they opened that up, you know, there were some new cats in town that might not look in crawl spaces or report some of these issues. And this is back in the days when the lender or the loan officer could choose the appraiser. And so I was going to report what I would see. So basically my business kind of dried up a little bit. And although I was that guy that just did the mortgage work, I got to keep my bankers happy. Well, I went from having, you know, a pretty substantial appraisal office to not having as much work coming in because they had the luxury of choosing. And we, you know, for various reasons, the market slowed down, the rates went up a little bit, but also some of the folks were asking for unethical stuff. And so out of a force of survival, I had to diversify my practice. I had to do things that maybe other appraisers weren't interested in doing. And so that's one of the things I know that you speak about a lot, Dustin, about about possible solutions, or not putting all your eggs in one basket, if you will. So can you kind of speak to our viewers on that topic a little bit?
Right. Well, I think it's a great topic, and it's one that I hit on quite often. I do want to make it clear right up top, those that have not done a lot of quote unquote non-lender work might be surprised by this, but I think it's important. And that is, it's not all it's cut out to be. I know individuals that focus primarily on non-lender work, and sometimes in private conversations they lament that, because it comes with a cost, and literally it comes with a price tag. If you want to do a lot of non-lender work, you're going to have to do some advertising, whether that be on Facebook or billboards, or the time spent in realtor conventions. There is a cost that is involved in the marketing side, where it's very easy these days to pick up the phone and call an AMC and say, hey, send me your paperwork. I'd like to fill out the packet and give you my samples and get started. In the overall scheme of things, and I know some appraisers thinking, yeah, have you seen those packets lately, Dustin? The answer is no, I haven't, because I have a great staff who does that for me. But I understand. I've done them before. Sometimes they're multiple pages long, and they're difficult. But on the overall scheme of things, to sign up to do appraisals directly for an AMC is a much easier process than to get the ball rolling on the non-lender side of things. To be able to get your name out there, and to be able to keep your name out there. In order to be on the non-lender side, you've got to be known, number one, and you've got to be known as an expert, number two. Those are two different things. In other words, your name needs to be known, but you also need to be equated with an expert in the local market. And that takes time, that takes energy, that takes a lot of vision and marketing, if you will. On the flip side of that, it also takes a lot of follow-up. Every time, I shouldn't say every time, that's not fair. Many times, Brian, when I do a non-lender, let's say it's a possible listing, a for sale by owner. I mean, I had one just 2 weeks ago that was a referral from someone else that I had done. They were happy with the work. I went out there, I did the appraisal, and literally spent an hour on the phone because this guy was absolutely insistent that his house was worth $380 and I had appraised it for $349. And I thought, why did you hire an appraiser to begin with if you already know what you're doing?
Exactly.
In other words,
Exactly.
It's not, sometimes people come to me and they say, man, I just want to do all non-lender work. That would be so easy. I wouldn't have to deal with all these Fannie Mae forms, and I wouldn't have to deal with the MC sheet, and I wouldn't have to deal with this fear of what's happening in the lending world. Well, guess what? There's a trade-off. It's not a perfect system either. It's still work. It's still a job. It still requires some effort on the appraisal side. That being said, Brian, I'm a huge advocate of what you talked about, and that is not putting all your eggs in one basket. There's something to be said about diversification. If you go to your wealth management person, your financial advisor, she's going to tell you to diversify. And there's a reason for that. It's a time-tested thing that when you put everything in one basket, the big dinosaur swoops down and takes the basket and you're gone. And so I absolutely am a fan of making sure you're diversified, not just, Brian, not just in the appraisal side of things. I just recorded a podcast last week that will come out here in a couple of weeks, and it's about diversification. And I talk about two things: diversifying within your appraisal office. In other words, not just doing stuff for Fannie Mae, but also looking at consulting, also looking at non-lender side of things, also looking at a lot of different other things that we could list here, and probably will here in a minute or so. But also diversification in your life. What about having something on the side that you're also doing, such as investment, real estate investment? Now, sure, it's still in the real estate basket. I get that, but there's a big difference between appraisal and say, buying a home, fixing it up, and renting it out. We as appraisers have a great insight into our local market, an insight that most investors don't have. We understand values. We understand cost. We understand sales price. We understand why those three things are different. And so we have the ability to maybe look at things a little bit different than say our neighbor would. But what about diversifying completely out? I've got a great buddy that's part of my all-star team who lives down in Texas, a great appraiser, new appraiser, has only been doing this less than a year, but he and his fiance are also running a coffee business. I mean, I think that's
Nice,
super
nice.
wise. You know, have your feelers out there and be diversified, because we really don't know what tomorrow will bring. And I sleep better at night knowing that I have options.
There you go. There you go. So if we if we want to talk about how the typewriter salesman's doing these days, you know, he's probably not doing too good. You know, a lot of folks, a lot of new appraisers don't even know what a typewriter is, for crying out loud. So yeah, we need to constantly be ready for change, because that's going to happen. And so let's talk a little bit about diversification and some of these areas. You know, there are so many ways, and at first, let's just talk about from an appraiser standpoint, and then we could talk about non-appraiser if you want. But I want to kind of narrow that focus a little bit for appraising right now. There's so many ways to make money in real estate. It's just, you know, I'm thinking of new things every day, and I've got to try to stop my mind sometimes. But for the appraiser that wants to just stick with appraising per se, let's talk about a couple of those things. We talk about DOT work. You know, I believe where you live, they're still building roads, or they're widening roads, or litigation support. People are going to, you know, I believe it's over 50% of first marriages end in divorce, and that's a sad statistic, but it is a statistic. I believe it's over 70% of second marriages end in divorce. And if you're thinking about a third marriage, don't even try it. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Estate work, people are going to continue to die. So, I mean, these are areas where evaluation services are needed that most folks just, you know, they get in that routine. You know, I've always said that we're kind of slow. We're like cattle. We all move in the same direction real slowly. Next time you're in a class, and this is for the viewers too, and next time you're in a class, just take a little survey. Hey, how many of you do mortgage work? And when I ask that question in my classes, typically the majority, if not all, the hands go up. And then I'll say, well, how many of you would work with an attorney as an expert witness in a divorce case? And many times no hands will go up. Sometimes maybe one or two hands will go up. Relocation appraisal work. I mean, where you live, I know in certain markets, there's folks that can do relo work and do nothing but that, because there's such a need for that. And guess what? They typically need at least 2 appraisals on that. So do you have any recommendations? If I know you said you need to be known, you need to involve in some advertising, you need to be good at what you do, obviously. But in some of these areas that I just mentioned, do you have any recommendations or any thoughts on that of how, if someone wants to explore becoming an expert witness in a litigation? I mean, what would be your recommendation? Somebody called you today and asked you, hey, I hear there's not a big supply. There's a scarcity, if you will, of appraisers willing to do that type of work. I think I might be okay or be effective as a witness. How can I break into that business, Dustin?
Sure. I'm going to get to the answer on that question, Brian, but if you don't mind, I want to set it up just a little bit. I think as appraisers, we need to take a look at our business model as a whole. In other words, we can go down, the rabbit hole here or the rabbit hole there, and we can talk about, and I think we should talk about different ideas of how appraisers can and should diversify. But let's look at it from a 5,000-foot level first. And that is this. If you want to expand, there's several different things that you can look at. One of the things you can look at is the type of appraisals that you do. So for example, most of the listeners or the viewers right now are probably, I would guess, most of them are going to be residential appraisers. And when I say residential appraisers, that's all they do is residential work, 1 to 4 family residential work. Have you considered commercial? Brian, I can tell you that I worked side by side with a commercial guy for a week or so, and I would rather be a greeter at Walmart than do that. And so, no offense to greeters at Walmart, I think that's a great job. But I'm sorry. In other words, I would rather find something else altogether than be a commercial guy, but that's just me. I know other appraisers that are very interested in that work. And my guess is it would not be as difficult to find a mentor as some people have finding a residential mentor, because that work is much, much different. It's much more mathematical and statistically based. Maybe that's why it doesn't appeal to me. But appraisers, have you considered the types of appraisal work that you do? Remember, we're not just talking appraisal here, we're talking valuation. You know, the name of my company locally is Appraisal Precision and Consulting Group. And there's a reason for that. There's consultation side of things. It's not uncommon for me to meet with an individual. I had one just 2 weeks ago, an individual where I met who was looking to buy an investment property. It was a 4-family, pretty dilapidated little multifamily property. And we talked, and I talked to him about the cost of fix up and the value currently and the value long term. Now, this can all be done, and we can remain USPAP compatible as long as we understand what USPAP is, and we understand that it's not just clicking on boxes and filling in words. There's a lot of different things that we as appraisers can and should at least look at, if not be doing. The other thing to look at, Brian, is the report types that we put out there. Again, I think the 1004, 5 years from now, I'm going to make a prediction right here on your program. Okay. I don't think the 1004 will be gone in 5 years, but I do think it'll be gone in 10 years. And I think it will be used much less in 5 years than it is now. If that
let me chime in if I can. That form, I think the form we use right now is what, dated 2005? Is that right? 2005 edition. And we probably need a new form, for crying out loud. You know, it's not a great form. You better be adding some stuff to that if you use that regularly. But I always ask when I have some.
What the hell's a countertop line? Seriously, we don't have.
Well, that's what I ask. Anytime I have any lenders or bankers in my class, I ask them, in all seriousness now, I want you to think about this and answer this question honestly. How many loans have ever been denied based upon what the bathroom wainscot is? I'm just curious. I'm just curious. I'm sorry, Dustin. I didn't.
How many appraisers even know how to pronounce it? Is it wainscot? I don't know.
So I couldn't help myself.
Is the appraiser type or the appraisal type? Remember, we're talking standard 1, standard 2. Standard 1 is the development. Standard 2 is the report. Okay, and we have to have a reliable report. We've got to have a credible appraisal. And with that report, there's a lot of different things that we can do. We can look at restricted reports. I perform appraisals all the time on one sheet of paper. As far as the delivery goes, there's no grid, there's no adjustments. My work file is as full as it would be for a full, pardon, Brian, full appraisal. But you know, there's a lot of different things to look at. You know, 2 years ago, and maybe I'll get beat up for this, but I started to, because I was getting questions from my students, my clients across the nation. I do some coaching for appraisers, and they were asking me about these desktops. And so I looked into it, and I ran away from them at first. And then I started looking at them not from a cost or a fee perspective, but from a per hour perspective. And guess what, Brian? I can typically, depending on if I'm picky about my clients and I'm picky about the report type and what I can put in, what I can't put in, and that I can cover my rear end, I can typically make more per hour doing desktops than I can do quote unquote full appraisals or 1004s. So absolutely. Other options. Are we looking at other report types? Now, your question was more toward estate work or litigation work, or, you know, these other non-lender things. And number one, Brian, to answer your question, you said, where do you get started? Number one, you got to get started online. There are far too many appraisers that do not even have a website. Folks, you cannot be in the non-lender realm and not have a website. That's the way appraisers are found. That's the way that you establish two things. Remember, there's two things that you need to do to get work as a non-lender appraiser. Number one, you got to be known. And number two, you got to be known as an expert. Again, they're two different things. Your name has to be known. People have to know you as an appraiser, but they also have to believe, have faith that you are an expert in the field. Well, how are you going to do that if you don't have a website? If you don't have a blog? You've got to have a blog. You've got to be putting information out there that says, hey, I are here and I are a genius, right? And
Right.
people will be able to see that, read that, and understand who you are and say, you know what? That guy seems to know what he's talking about. And it's not as hard as you think. A lot of appraisers are like, well, I'm not a genius. I can't write. Okay, folks, there's all kinds of ways that you can get others. You ever heard of ghostwriting? You ever heard of spinning? You know, there's a lot of ways to get that blog out there, and you need to. And if writing isn't your thing, maybe a YouTube channel. You know, maybe every once in a while you turn on your camera when you're on an inspection, say, hey, here's an interesting thing. You know, I've been asked in the past about railings on decks. You know, do I need a railing on a deck? Well, here's a great example. I'm at this property. Let me teach you. 3-minute video. You throw that up on your blog, you throw that up on your website, and all of a sudden you are an expert because people see you. They understand that you know a little something about what you do. And I think that's really where you need to start, Brian, is to establish yourself in the local market as the expert, somebody who knows what they're talking about, and people will flock to you when they need an appraisal at that point.
You know what's interesting, Dustin, is that we as, I'm getting some echo here really bad. What surprises me is that a lot of appraisers don't realize the value they bring to the table. It's amazing to me because we're valuation experts and we don't see our own value per se. And I always tell folks, hey, if you're at that barbecue this coming weekend and you're having a couple of adult beverages and you're chatting, and the guy says, hey, Dustin, I know you're an appraiser. I'm just curious, you know, should I update both bathrooms or should I update the kitchen? What do you think? What do you think? You know, if you answer that question, you're giving away your services. Should I put a pool in or should I, you know, what should I think about that? Now, if you want to give away your services, that's up to you. But if you were at that same barbecue and you ask an attorney, hey, I'm entering into a partnership and can you give me some legal advice right now? What would the attorney say? They say, hey, make an appointment, come to my office and bring your checkbook. Or if a doctor's there, hey, and I've got this condition, can get your medical bag and take a look. You know, they would encourage you to come into their practice. And we as appraisers need to think about that as well. One of the other things I wanted to go back to is you mentioned types of report, and I know we're about to run out of time, and we've got a couple other questions coming in. So, guys, if you have any questions, please ask those quickly because I'm going to lose Dustin here in a minute. We'll get to as many as we can, and hopefully we can get some questions answered after this webinar if need be. But when you talked about report types a moment ago, I found that very interesting. And you mentioned restricted. And a lot of appraisers, because Dustin, that's how we were trained. We were trained to do everything in a nice little package. And that's what we do regardless of the intent. Use. You're going to get a 1004 with all the addendum, no matter if it's for a divorce or for a purchase or for a homeowner thinking about selling their home. And that's just not always the case. I mean, a homeowner, for crying out loud, who's thinking about selling their house, they know what the house looks like. Is it 100% necessary that we take a photograph and then sell it back to them? Or a floor plan they walk every day? Are we going to, part of the fee I'm paying you is for a floor plan? You know, there's such a thing as an oral report. And appraisers need, you know, they resist that maybe because they've never done it. But we actually have the ability to develop an appraisal via Standard 1, as you mentioned a moment ago. But when it comes to the reporting options of Standard 2, we have some options. And now we have 3. We have the appraisal report, the restricted, and we have an oral. So what are your thoughts on appraisers trying? By the way, I'll just give this out. You know, I have people ask me for copies of my restricted, and I don't typically just give that away. But there are some samples on the Appraisal Foundation website. Sure. That you can actually go to www.appraisalfoundation.org, I believe. And there are actually samples of a restricted. So you might check, I believe, Dustin, if I remember correctly, there's a sample for a residential and a non-residential. Yeah. And when you check that out and see what's there's not a whole lot there.
Yeah. Again, Standard 1 is how we develop that appraisal, and Standard 2 is how we report that appraisal. I think appraisers forget, because we are 1004 people, that there are other options out there. That if somebody calls up and says, hey, I want you to do a personal appraisal, this is not for a loan. I just am looking at possibly listing my house, or I'm trying to make a decision, or maybe maybe I want to take the mortgage insurance off. I just don't know if I'm quite there yet, if I want to go through the process yet. You know, there's a lot of different things that we as appraisers can do. why are we showing up, doing a sketch, as you said, taking a picture of every room, looking up in the attic and things that we might do for other clients that are very client specific. Remember, folks, we are valuation professionals. We're not just form fillers, and we're not even just appraisers. There's a lot of different options out there. I encourage, you talk about knowing our worth, knowing our value, Brian. And one thing I ask appraisers on a regular basis is, how much are you worth per hour? Would you be surprised, Brian, that most can't answer that question?
Wow.
And
yeah.
I think it's a question you've got to be able to answer. If you can't, a lawyer, a doctor, we talked earlier about a financial advisor. Every one of those people, you ask them what they're worth per hour, and they will answer you that fast. They absolutely know.
Sure.
Absolutely. Why don't we? If we want to be seen as professionals, we need to treat ourselves as professionals. And that's why I said, desktop reports, a lot of people shy away from them. What are you talking about? $125 for a full appraisal? There's no way I'm going to do that. Well, what if you're making $125 an hour as compared to maybe $75 an hour because of the drive time and the comp pictures and the this, that, and the other, the scope of work that you've got to do for a 1004? What if you could make more money doing something different? It's something to consider. Not all can, by the way. I've coached individuals who have looked at desktops, they've dived in, and they said, you know what, this ain't for me. Great. At least you've said you've tried it, and maybe you're open to it in the future. But so many appraisers, number one, don't know what they're worth, and number two, are not willing to branch out and say, you know what, there's some other options out there. I do want to make it very, very clear, Brian, because this has been a little bit doom and gloomish. I am not predicting that appraisers are going away. Again, the article that I wrote is at the end of the appraiser, question mark. The spoiler alert is no. Read through that. You'll know where I stand on this. I think that we're going to be very viable into the future, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't diversify. We absolutely should. Whether these PIWs are happening or not, that's just a wise decision.
Right. Absolutely. And then there's other things that we haven't had a chance to talk about, but I want to get to some questions before I let you off the hook here. And I know you've got to leave here in just a few minutes. Guys, as far as non-appraisal work, become a real estate agent, for crying out loud. I got my real estate license last year. Do what?
I said, ouch, you're diving in.
Yeah, well, hey, the thing that I found out as a new realtor, a lot of real estate agents, they go out on a list, they shy away from listing appointments because they don't know what to tell these folks to list the property for.
Exactly.
And who's better that, now not acting as an appraiser, acting in another capacity, maybe tax appeals or consulting. There's so many various ways. But real quick, let's ask some questions of you, because I know you've only got a few minutes left. Debbie is asking, do we have to have a website through a provider software, or can an independent website work? Your thoughts on that, Dustin?
Yeah, great question. I don't know. I don't know that when she says, do we have to, you can do it either way. The answer is no, you don't have to have it one way or the other, but there are pros and cons. If you do it through a software provider, you have to ask the question, how much SEO is going to be involved in there? If you don't know what SEO is, just Google it. Search engine optimization, absolutely critical for a good website. It's a trade-off, Brian. Let's put it this way. Let's just boil this down. If you do it through a software provider, whether that be an appraisal software provider or a place like Squarespace that would, online provide a format for a particular type of a website, or if you do it on your own. The trade-off is this: if you don't know a lot about tech and you're not willing to hire out, probably should go with somebody that gives you a template. On the other hand, if you want to have more flexibility and you've got a little ability to be able to learn a new skill, years ago, Brian, I created my own website and I knew nothing about website. It was all self-taught, and it was hours, and I wouldn't do it again. But the bottom line is we can learn a little bit something, and it'll give us a little bit more flexibility. So Debbie, it's up to you how you want to proceed, but there's pros and cons of each.
Great. Chuck asked a question. How can an appraiser tell you what a property is worth if they do not even know what their own time is worth? And that just goes back, that echoes what you said a moment ago. Tim asked,
Brian, before you move on, let me just say, just to reemphasize something. You know, one of the things that I look at when I do quote unquote bid requests, meaning maybe an AMC calls and says, hey, we've got a property, we're wondering if you would take it, it's in this city, here's the address. Before I bid, I'm going to do a little research and I'm going to find out a little bit about that property. And I'll tell you how I figure out my fee. My fee is based on a per hour. I know what I'm worth per hour. I look at that property, I can guesstimate pretty close. And I always go a little bit high because I'd rather be paid too much than too little, and say, you know what, this is going to take me 4 hours. Here's my per hour. It's a real simple. Even a guy that went to public schools like myself can take the per hour times what I'm worth per hour and come up with a pretty good bid. And that's the way I bid my properties, not just, you know, my fee's $450. No, I think that every single property needs to be looked at as a per hour thing. And so, Chuck, great question. We need to know what we're worth, and we need to be doing our appraisal work based on what we want to make per hour.
You know, I would echo that a little bit. I've had a lot of appraisers that used to do FHA, and when FHA makes a change or something, you know, the sky's falling, and I'm not going to do those anymore. And I simply say that they say, well, it's riskier. And my response to that typically, Dustin, is, you know, if an applicant goes into a bank and has horrible credit, what kind of interest rate are they going to get if they even get the loan? And obviously they're going to get a high rate. And why is that? Because they represent a higher risk to that financial institution. If somebody goes in with an excellent credit rating, they have a lower interest rate because it's less risk involved. And I said, well, apply that same technique to your appraisal practice. If you're doing an appraisal that you feel that there's more risk associated with that, why don't you do what the banks do and charge a higher interest rate or a higher fee? And as opposed to just saying, well, I don't do that kind of work anymore. It's too risky for me. Well, charge for your time, but if you feel that there's more risk associated with a particular thing, maybe you should charge a component of that fee should be also a measure of risk. A couple of more questions and we'll.
Brian, you know, sometimes when we do another appraisal on something that maybe we've done something a couple of weeks earlier, and for whatever reason we're doing a second appraisal on it, I don't just look at that as, oh, gee, I just have to change the name and turn it in. Absolutely not. Number one, has the market changed in 2 weeks? That's one thing that we as professionals need to look at. But on the other side, I'm going to charge for the fact that I now have 2 appraisal reports, 2 separate appraisals out there that both have some litigation fear on them. And so I absolutely build that into the price.
Absolutely. Tim asks, gentlemen, would you treat the issue of more formal education and its need relative to diversification?
Yeah, you know, I know Tim, and I think he and I maybe feel differently on this. I don't know if he's talking about the 4-year degree requirement or not, but let's just talk education in general. I'm not a big fan of the 4-year degree. I can see some benefit in it, certainly. But as far as a requirement to become an appraiser, I'm not a big fan. Do I have a built-in bias? Yes. I've got a gal that's worked for me for close to 8 years now. She does not have her college education. She wants to be a quote unquote appraiser. She's in a challenging situation as far as, not that she couldn't do it, but it would be very, very big sacrifice for her to go back to college. And so, you know, should she have that restriction? I absolutely don't believe that she should, but that's okay. There's benefit in education. And I would say this, Tim, you know, let's not just talk about college, but education in general. You know, sure. Years ago, Brian, you talked about relocation work. Years ago, I decided I wanted to know more about relocation work. And instead of just hanging out my shingle and saying, I'm now a relo appraiser, I felt like I needed to educate myself. And I took not 1, but 2 classes and really learned it inside and out. I also hooked myself with another appraiser who had done relo work for a time period to make sure that I could get competent and do what I felt like I could advertise that I could do. And now I do relo work. It's not a huge part of my portfolio, but again, it's all about diversification. But that came down to education, making sure that we understand what we are doing so that we can present ourselves as professionals.
Excellent. Dustin, I want to thank you for your time today. If any of our viewers out there want to get in touch with you directly, what is the best way for them to reach out to you and make contact?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook, but you know, you can just search for the Appraiser Coach on Facebook if you want to reach me that way. You can also go to my website again, www.theappraisercoach.com. You can always send me an email. I do get my emails. I used to be able to claim that I get them directly. They now go through a wonderful assistant, but I still will see them, and they'll still get answered. But you can reach me via email. It's thecoach@theappraisercoach.com, thecoach@theappraisercoach.com.
Dustin, thanks again so much for your time. I believe I'm getting you out on time. I have a minute till, so I know you've got a busy day with a lot of inspections to do, so I want to make sure we ended promptly. I want to thank all our viewers and thank our guest again, Mr. Dustin Harris, the Appraiser Coach, and we look forward to seeing you all again next month. We've got a real special guest, Mr. Jeff Dickstein, is going to be with us talking about desktop appraisals, so please be sure you check back in with us next month. Thanks again, my friend. I look forward to seeing you soon, and thanks all of you.
Thanks, Brian. Have a great day. Appreciate it.